So we're recording now. So welcome to or into Car Ride. My name is Chris O'Connor, and I am a learning program developer here at the Royal BC Museum. The Royal BC Museum is on the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, here in Victoria on Vancouver Island. I am an uninvited guest on this land and grateful to live, learn, and raise a family here. As many are joining not where I am, I encourage you to give yourself a moment to reflect on the territory you are on. And if you are not sure which territory you're on, the website and app Native Land is a great resource to properly situate yourself wherever you are in the world. So the artist and author Emily Carr was born just 4 blocks that way, nearly 150 years ago. And she died 3 blocks that way at what is now the James Bay Inn. She spent much of her eventful life in this neighborhood of James Bay, where the Royal BC Museum is located. But her influence and impact stretch significantly further. Sadia Hartman writes, every generation confronts the task of choosing its past. Inheritances are chosen as much as they are passed on. The past depends less on what happened when than on the desires and discontents of the present. Strivings and failings shape the stories we tell, end quote. So much of the stories we tell of Emily Carr are grounded in the material culture that exists within museum collections and archives, and interpreted through the people that unpack and dig into all that stuff, shaping our understandings through paintings, sketches, letters, etc. As the Royal BC Museum is currently exhibiting Emily Carr Fresh Seeing, French Modernism and the West Coast, an exhibition developed by the Audain Art Museum. Tonight is an opportunity to grapple, unpack, reflect on the work of Emily Carr. I've invited 6 impressive thinkers that work at 6 different organizations that have Emily Carr work in their collection. The question for the evening is, which piece by Emily Carr has shifted and deepened your thinking most about Carr's influence and impact? So each presenter will have about 6-ish minutes to present. We'll have 3 presenters, then take a short break, then the final 3 presenters. At the end of the session, we'll have everyone up and try to make some connections across presentations. And we'll end at 8:30 here on the West Coast, 11:30 on the East Coast. And I'm sorry, but what better way to spend an 11:30 hour than with our museum friends? Exactly. So yeah. So, but actually what I want to do is start with you, with everyone out there. So I'm going to share this. So you can open up another tab on your screen, and presenters do this as well, if you don't mind, and put into the search www.menti.com. And it's going to ask for a code. So 9321278. You'll see that at the top of the screen. So menti.com, 9321278. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the next screen.
Am I supposed to be doing this? No.
Yeah, you can. You're welcome to.
Okay, but you're screen sharing, so I have no screen to work with.
Right. So you could use your phone, but also don't worry about it too.
I'm not gonna worry about it. Okay.
Yeah. Don't. So the question especially for participants, but presenters, you're welcome to join as well with this. So the question is, what word or words would you use to describe Emily Carr's art and impact? So so emotional. It'll give you the option to put 3 different words. So feel free to start with a word and then do another word. Why? Interesting. colorful, powerful, modern, slow burn, creative. Oh, powerful, provocative, from the heart, colorful, inspirational, raw, dark, swirling, determined, full of breath, Canadian, lush, unbound. Sarah, what word would you use since you're not able to put it in there? Or one of those words resonate with you?
I liked what someone said, full of breath. And that struck me as a really beautiful phrase to use, because her body and her way of moving the brush are so linked to each other that I feel that there must have been a relationship there between how she breathed and how she moved with the materials.
Great.
Like
so immersed, timeless, rhythmic. And inviting. All right. So thank you for sharing, everyone, both in Zoom and Facebook Live. So I'm going to share my screen again, because we have arrived. We're getting in the car. We're about to take our journey, a car ride. And as I mentioned, there's 3 presenters to start with. So the first 3 presenters, Kiriko Watanabe, Sarah Milroy, and Susan Rome. So we're going to start with Kiriko Watanabe. Kiriko is the Gail and Stephen A. Jaroslawski curator at the Audain Art Museum. Kiriko is interested in the visual culture of British Columbia, including art, architecture, and design, with a special focus on West Coast modernist traditions. Kiriko is the co-curator of the Emily Carr Fresh Seeing, French Modernism in the West Coast exhibition, and the West Coast exhibition, currently on display at the Royal BC Museum. So welcome, Kiriko, and I'm glad that you will start off, because you were instrumental in the exhibition that inspired this event. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris, tonight. Good evening, everyone. Emily Carr had a lifelong interest in Indigenous peoples of the Northwest Coast and their visual culture. Today, I'm going to talk about the progression of Carr's artistic styles by highlighting her work canoes, Alert Bay, oil on canvas, signed and dated 1912 from the collection of the Audain Art Museum. Emily Carr visited Kwakiwakwa community of Alert Bay in 1907 on her cruise trip to Alaska with her sister Alice. She was inspired by what she saw in this remote Indigenous community and returned there to draw again in 1908 and 1909. Like many others from this time, Emily thought that the First Nations cultures, communities were disappearing, and she had to document them while she could. Next slide, please. During one of these trips, she created a watercolor of war canoes. The composition and colors in this work were essentially realistic. A conventional landscape that was executed quite beautifully. She already had some intensive art trainings in San Francisco and in London, England. She would have been around 37 years old when she created this and was yet to establish a definitive personal style in her work. Can we see the war canoes oil on canvas again, please? Go back, yes. The work canoe oil on canvas created a few years later is based on that watercolor we just saw. you can see quite clearly that her work has completely transformed. This dramatic shift in Carr's work occurred as a result of her time in France in 1910 and 1911. The work news is much more imaginative, lively, colorful, compared to her earlier watercolor. Emily experimented her new way of painting by using her own work and painted it differently by applying the modern way of expression she learned in France. She incorporated her own artistic observation that she called fresh seeing, with redefined line, unnaturally bright color, unique pictorial space and perspectives, and delivered an entirely new result. The other major difference that one will see between these two works is the addition of a group of people behind the canoe. Clearly, Emily added them intentionally to turn the work from a pure landscape to a more complicated village scene, an indication of her freedom of creativity and desire to produce an enhanced outcome. Next slide, please. Oops, one after, yes. Interestingly, the similar use of colors and painting techniques found in the 1912 work news that you see on the right side of the slide appear in some paintings she created in France. For example, on the left, Les Paysages, known in English as Brittany Landscape, is an important painting Carr created in her life, as it was one of the two paintings exhibited in an annual international art salon, Salon de Ton in Paris in 1911. Even though settings in which these paintings, Les Paysages, and the work news were made were completely different, the way she painted the field, the sky, the mountains, with bright colors and bold brush strokes demonstrate Emily's mastery of the Fauvist painting style through an exposure to many artistic influences she had in France. Her time in France was a life-changing journey for her, and her passion for art during these years made her highly prolific. Let's see the next slide. Today, Emily Carr's depiction of Indigenous lives could be viewed as deeply political. She has constructed an imagery that would lead to a certain interpretation of First Nations culture. Recently, I visited the Equinox Gallery in Vancouver at their new location and saw this new work by Sonny Yasu, which would be an addition to his intervention on the imagery series. Sonny takes Emily Carr's portrayal of his ancestral communities and intervenes her imagery by inserting Northwest Coast phone lines. This work, Galaga Power Up, is based on Carr's work news watercolor, which could possibly be scanned from my essay in the Fresh Seeing book. The word Galaga in the title comes from a video game made by Namco in Japan in 1980s. We can see Sonny's personal interest in popular video games and spaceship movies. The ovoid shapes hovering over the sky behind the canoes look as if extraterrestrials are visiting the Northwest Coast. The two creatures designed with the Northwest Coast foam lines look like characters from an outer space. They appear to be checking out the massive war canoes. In this work, Sonny has highlighted Emily's signature at the bottom right corner with an ovoid. While some may argue that Emily Carr's work on the Northwest Coast communities and visual expressions to be cultural appropriation, some others may see her representation of their cultures a great passion for her own art. I'm going to end my presentation by saying that Emily Carr's work news Art Bay, next slide please, is a remarkable work of art. Definitely one of her greatest accomplishments. It is even more profound as the work certainly indicates her affinity for modern art because of her studies in France and her genuine interest in the Northwest Coast indigenous peoples. Carr's legacy lives on as her works continue to inspire viewers and artists today. The 1912 work news Alert Bay helps us understand how Carr's artistic practice developed over time, and for that reason, I've chosen to talk about this painting today. Thanks to the donation of this painting from Michael Audain and Yoshiko Karasawa to the Audain Art Museum, I'm so pleased that this amazing work is on display for the public to see, along with many other wonderful paintings by this brilliant BC artist. Thank you. That's my presentation.
Wonderful.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kiriko. That was fantastic, and it would to see that work alongside Sanyasu's work one day would also.
There are 4 or 5 other new works that's been created that were on display. And they're all in the Fresh Seeing exhibition.
Oh, right. Okay. So we're going to go on to our next presenter. So Sarah Milroy is a Toronto-based critic and writer, contributing widely to such publications as the Globe and Mail, Walrus, Canadian Art, and Border Crossings. From 2001 to 2010, Milroy was the staff critic of the Globe and Mail, covering major exhibitions and artist projects from all parts of Canada. Currently, she is the chief curator of the McMichael Canadian Art Collection. And,
That's all true.
yeah, oh, good. And you're up, Sarah.
I don't get much chance to freelance anymore these days, but I'll get back to it later on. Well, I was lucky enough to work on an exhibition of Carr as well that took place at Dulwich Picture Gallery in London a number of years ago and came back to the AGO. And in the course of my research for that, it was long before I was at the McMichael, I came across, when we were looking for works for that show, a wonderful sketchbook that's in the collection at McMichael called Pause, the sketchbook for Pause. And I thought, since we've all been in a pause for the past 8, 9, 10 months now, that it was going to be the kind of perfect thing to maybe talk about tonight, because this is a book that she made when her life was kind of put on hold. She had gone over in 1899 to London to study art at the Westminster School of Art. This is before her Paris years that Kiriko's just been speaking about. She worked very, very hard in London. She had an enormous amount of anxiety about her performance and being judged and whether she was up to speed. She was being pursued by a young man from Canada who had romantic interests in her, and that was a source of distress to her. She had trouble sort of fitting in with her classmates, and generally, I think, suffered a great deal of anxiety about being a Canadian in the fancy old world of England as she saw it. Even though she was a first generation immigrant, and you know, her own parents were British and had been born there, she still very much felt like an outsider. And it was so much so, I think, that between the heavy workload she imposed upon herself and these other psychological issues that were brewing, she had a kind of breakdown, and she was placed in a institution called the Sunhill Sanatorium, north and east of London. And the sanatorium was really used for the treatment of tuberculosis, but they took in other types of strays as well. And that indeed was what became of Emily Carr for about 18 months, a long period of time when she was there. So what I'm going to try and do now, can you enable my screen share, Chris?
You should be enabled. You should be able
to. Okay, let me see what I can do. Yeah, this might be a bit messy, so bear with me. Will I get this full screen? It'll come now. Wait a sec. Well, that's unfortunate. Hold on a second. I'm just going to go like this with your forbearance. Is that all right with all of you? So here it is, the Suffolk. You can see this is the first little sort of ratty little page of this sketchbook. And it's not a sketchbook full of exquisite drawings, but it is a sketchbook that's revealing of what was going on inside her. And I think there's actually themes in this little sketchbook that run through the whole life, but they're kind of more nakedly revealed here than in other works and finished works of art, for example, in paintings. So here she is at the daily weigh-in. Saturday morning. It was women only in the sanatorium. It was highly regimented. She struggled a lot with their control of food and their daily regimen, of exercise and fresh air. They had to sleep outside with rather on these porches with the windows open, so it was freezing cold. She felt very spoken down to and managed by the men and women there. You can see here that she's being brought her pills, and the nurse, and I think one of the things that's interesting about this is that she depicts herself as rather lovely looking in this one, but then there are other images that we'll see where her imagery of herself is really grotesque. So I think this kind of dysmorphia that we see in this sketchbook really reveals a lot about her sort of what kind of battles she had inside her, what kind of struggles she had about her own self-regard. Of course, writing these sprightly little verses that go with the drawings. In many cases, she had this incredible facility of language, even here back in 1903. So here's another mood, also in bed, but feeling very different. And as I say, not depicting herself in the same kind of, this is quite an adorable sort of mignon figure that she's cutting here in this picture, but here is something sort of more grumpy and collapsed about her. These are her fellow inmates at the sanatorium who are sleeping outdoors in these cots. So she's observing everything around her, which is the other thing, is that, this was a person who never stopped kind of looking at things around her, but also trying to make sense of them, make form out of them. This is her view of the patriarchy, I think, is fairly clear here. This tall, lanky, sort of snobby looking fellow being chased about and served by the women that work for him in the sanatorium. And also sort of a phalanx of men that are looking on rather judgmentally. One of the projects that Emily Carr took on at the sanatorium as a way of kind of not going mad with boredom was that she adopted birds, that she would take nests, eggs out of nests or baby birds out of nests, and she would take them into her room, which had these windows open, for good parts of the day and night. And their nests would be there and she would feed them, and they would become then sort of dependents upon her. And the other inmates kind of got in on this too, and they were feeding these birds as well. So there was this real interest in the natural world. Her idea was that she was going to bring songbirds from England and tame them all and then transport them all back to Victoria, because what she said about Victoria was that it was a terrible thing that Victoria didn't have British songbirds. So her plan was that she was going to transport these birds into the wilderness. And this became a big project for her. Here are the gentlemen looking into the bushes where she's found a nest, and she's saying, "Why can't men mind their own business?" at the bottom, which is one of my favorites here. And you can see, she's kind of taking a very different view of herself. So there's a way in which I think that you look here and you see that the way that she viewed herself in relationship to the kind of gender norms of the day is often to figure herself as a kind of grotesque figure. So I think it reveals how difficult it was to be Emily Carr in 1903, to be that kind of a woman set on having an unconventional life and doing things their own way. And this bird is looking very alarmed at the top. Another way in, I think this is a wonderful drawing, and here she is over here kind of looking askance at the goings on. A lot of control of the body in this book. Here's a beautiful drawing that she made of herself. So again, swinging wildly between a kind of grotesque view and a very self-loving, sort of tender and sweet view of herself. And here she is feeding her her little birds at 5 o'clock in the morning, and she writes "Darnum" at the bottom because I guess it's an early start to the day, but this was all by her design, of course. here one of the things that happened to Emily Carr is that she got an infected toe, which had to be amputated, in fact, in England, because it couldn't be solved. So this is this is her. So again, a total swing in the opposite direction from the depiction before. I think she's being taken about in a wheelbarrow for some period of time. I think it was a couple of weeks while she was healing. Here's one of the doctors again, rings on his fingers, a hook in his nose, vulgarity pure wherever he goes. Now, one of the things that this book also reveals, and it was revealed in several points in Carr's writings, is her anti-Semitism. And I think this is a racial caricature that she's giving us here. And it's when you love Emily Carr and you get deeply immersed in the work, when you come upon this kind of material, it's very hard. Kiriko will probably nod here, but you see things like this and you're like, oh God, I don't want to know that, But she was very much, even though she had this very, prescient and probing sensitivity to the humanity of Indigenous people and ways in which they were mistreated in society, she was also equally capable of being privy to the prejudice of her day in other areas. And this is something that comes up in the writing at several points. Of course, other critics have remarked on it, but this is one of the more finished drawings in the sketchbook and obviously has that intonation to it. So here are her songbirds. This one is looking a little sad. Now, the very, very strange thing about this story, which is why I think this book is so important, then where am I now? Oh, I've got like 1 minute, is that she cultivates these birds. They're the love of her lives. She spends all her free time on them. And she suddenly comes to the realization that, in fact, they will not survive being transplanted to the British Columbian wilderness because there are hawks and eagles and ravens and all kinds of birds that would make, quick work of little British songbirds, and that they would be immediately killed if they were taken to British Columbia and released into the wild. They would not breed and fructify. So she makes a most peculiar decision, and that is she chloroforms them all. She takes these birds. This is a story about Emily Carr that is not known, even though it's right there in print. But and I see some aghast looks, but she just decided that that they couldn't live anymore in the in the wild in the UK because she tamed them all, and they would not survive transplanting to British Columbia. So she had them all. She chloroformed them all, and then she came back to Canada. And I think for me, this weird thing about British songbirds that can't come to the quote new world of British Columbia because they can't survive the rigors of this new world that she's a part of, and yet she feels these tender feelings towards the beauty of the British songbird, is really that kind of binary between those two things, to me, is about the tension in Carr's work between her love of Europe and her awareness of her British cultural identity that she gets through her family, and her desire to anchor herself in the new world that her parents had found in Victoria, at least for their family. Of course, we all know it's not a new world for Indigenous people, but for them it certainly was. So the story of the songbirds came to be a kind of central story for me in understanding Carr in terms of not belonging in England, that displacement and disorientation being a source of deep distress for her, but also very clearly not fully grasping that she did not fully belong to British Columbia either as a settler person. And I think a lot of what generated her work was this friction between those two identities never being able to be resolved, as indeed they can't be for many of us who love this country. So those are my thoughts about Emily Carr, and pause the sketchbook. Oh, it's so sad. It's a terrible story. I'm sorry, everyone. And then the last page of the book is a bunch of dead mice. So I mean, it's very, there's many drawings of dead mice at the end of this. So there was a streak there, and she doesn't give us that many windows into her, really what's going on inside her. The writing of Emily Carr is very much posing for the reader. It's actually quite mannered, and she presents herself as the wild, untamed child. There are these tropes in the writing that repeat, but this book, I think, gives us something that's quite unrehearsed. Of course, it was not intended for publication. The book itself was published after she died in 1953. So it's a raw glimpse into a very conflicted and fascinating person.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah.
You got
If you can just close
Stop.
your share screen.
Yeah.
There you go. Great. And I am here at the Royal BC Museum. There are a fair amount of birds and mice that are dead. So it is, yes. So we start with work news. We move on to a sketchbook and songbirds. And then our next stop is with Susan Rome. So Susan has worked as the Vancouver Art Gallery's program coordinator for schools and youth, and has developed an array of unique integrated learning programs for over 25 years. And I was a colleague of Susan, so I can attest to this, and then some. She's passionate about creating collaborative opportunities with the gallery's school staff, teachers, docents, and teens, and has specific expertise in managing educational programming for youth. Susan is the past co-chair of CAGE, Canadian Art Gallery Educators. So thank you so much for being here, Susan, and I'm gonna start sharing my screen now.
You can wait to show those slides, Chris.
Oh, sure. Yeah, then I'll stop sharing and I'll share once you're ready. All right.
I would like to begin. Thank you. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am on the unceded ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and I am honored to live and to work here. Thank you for having me tonight, Chris. It's always a pleasure working with you at the gallery, at the Royal BC Museum, and tonight trying to connect during pandemic times. I appreciate the opportunity to join with my colleagues in this conversation about Emily Carr. When I first began thinking about how to address the question, what work shifted my thinking and deepened my understanding about Emily Carr, the first work that came to my mind was Big Raven. I first encountered Big Raven when I began working at the Vancouver Art Gallery. It was 1988. I had come from the States and I didn't have a visual arts background, and I had never heard of Emily Carr. But when I saw Big Raven, I was completely in awe, and that emotion has never left me to this day. But what has changed since that day is the way I think about Big Raven and Emily Carr. And I credit that process of my growth and change to my role as a gallery educator. It is my job to offer strategies or tools so that students can look more closely, more deeply at the work, so that they can make connections and find personal meaning. And the strategy that I use to do this is called the entry point approach. It offers 5 different ways to enter a work and think more deeply about it. The entry points are aesthetic, narrative, logical, foundational, and experiential. And the folks at Project Zero at Harvard developed this. Tonight, what I'd like to do is use this entry point approach to take you into Big Raven. I would like to start with the aesthetic entry point, which invites us to look at line, color, shape, composition. And the first thing I would do as a gallery educator is begin by asking students, what do you see? So slide, please. I invite participants to write what they see, but I will take you through my own journey of what I saw at the time and what I still see. The first thing that jumps out to me is Big Raven smack in the middle of this canvas. Emily Carr has poised this carving in such a way to give us this incredibly majestic, powerful stance with its beak pointing up to the sky and this kind of laser focus to its gaze. It always stops me in my tracks. And I'm amazed at the way Emily Carr abstracts the landscape. She creates incredible movement in the grasses that they look like rushing ocean waves, and the movement in the trees in the background that look like they're nearly pulled over by the wind. But it's that light behind the raven that not only highlights the raven, but also acts as these columns of cubist light that look like maybe it's rain or sun or fields of snow. We don't exactly know what they are. And then, of course, the color, this sublime color of many, many different shades of green that Emily Carr is known for, and purples and blues and yellows. They're all perfectly blended together to create this rich, vivid, and for me, memorable experience. Now, this aesthetic entry point makes me want to know more about the process that Emily Carr used to create this work. This is the logical entry point. How was the work made? I learned that Big Raven was made in 1931, but was inspired by a sketch that Emily Carr did in Haida Gwaii on site in 1912. Can we see that sketch, that slide, please? This sketch is called Kumshawa, and it was done in watercolor and graphite on site. But Emily Carr reworked it in her studio in Victoria using oil on canvas. I wondered what led to the massive change in style in the 20 years between the sketch and the finished work. Well, the sketch that we see here was one of many works in a large exhibition that was held in Vancouver in 1913, where Emily Carr tried to sell them to the Royal BC Museum. But the Royal BC Museum rejected them. They said they were too abstract, they weren't realistic enough, and the Royal BC Museum wanted more of a documentary style. Emily Carr, as we learned, had just returned from France, and Victoria was not ready for this new style. Despite rejection, she never gave up. And then everything changed in 1927 when Emily Carr was invited by the group of seven. She was invited by the National Gallery to participate in an exhibition with the group of seven. And the group of seven encouraged her, supported her, and gave her the confidence to go back and rework her earlier work and infuse this new work, can we see Big Raven again, with her expressive, modernist, abstract style. I wanted to know more about Carr, the artist, which led me to the narrative entry point. What can story reveal about the art and the artists? Well, in Carr's case, stories were very easy to find since she's a prolific writer of 7 journals. In her journal Kliwik, which is the indigenous name that the Nuu-chah-nulth people gave her, Carr describes the moment she first came upon Kumshawa, which turned into Big Raven. She also writes extensively about traveling to many different First Nation sites in British Columbia. And with the help of 2 guides, she did lots of investigative work. What was really incredible was that she was traveling independently throughout British Columbia to these sites when most women were staying at home, getting married, and raising children. She made the conscious choice to live a very unconventional life as an artist in Victoria. I also read that Carr was in pursuit of trying to document every First Nation because she believed inaccurately that Indigenous cultures were dying. I didn't understand why Carr would think this, and I wanted to find out more, which led to the led to the foundational entry point. This foundational entry point asks us, what is the context of the work? Is the work still relevant? What can I learn from it? And it was this it was this entry point that really deeply shifted my thinking about Big Raven and Emily Carr. I learned that while Carr was painting Indigenous villages, the potlatch ban was in effect. The Government of Canada's Act from 1884 to 1951, which made it illegal for Indigenous people to practice their most important ceremonies and to produce and to engage in cultural production. But Carr doesn't mention this. I learned that Indigenous children were removed from their families and put into residential schools from 1883 until 1996. But Carr never mentions this. And I learned that the Government of Canada, and specifically British Columbia, was systematically taking land away from Indigenous people. But Carr didn't mention this either. Carr was part of the colonial narrative, and her paintings perpetuated this. She was a woman of her time. While Carr said that she was documenting dying cultures, many thinkers today consider her work to be cultural appropriation. Big Raven offered a window for me to learn about the history of Indigenous people in Canada. And it continues to act as a catalyst for important conversations that I have with students at the Vancouver Art Gallery. Looking at historical works like Big Raven through a post-colonial contemporary lens with the insight of Indigenous curators, artists, thinkers, and educators is essential now more than ever. Only recently, since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, have we integrated these conversations into the BC curriculum. The current exhibition at the gallery today, which is called Emily Carr and Her Female Contemporaries, situates Carr's work side by side with with Indigenous women artists. This is a very big shift from when I saw her work 30 years ago, when it was exhibited on its own. This leads to our last entry point, experiential, where students are offered the opportunity to create their own unique responses to looking closely at Big Raven, learning about the life of Emily Carr, and discovering the history of BC Indigenous cultures. This may take the form of sketching from work in the gallery, or creating a collaborative poem, or debating about cultural appropriation, or working with an Indigenous artist, or for younger students, embodying Big Raven by creating a group tableau of the work. These 5 entry points, aesthetic, logical, narrative, foundational, and experiential, have helped me and thousands of students enter Big Raven and think deeper about its meaning. The process has served as a touchstone for conversations about the evolution of artistic practice, the role of women in the arts, and the history of this place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Susan. So, and it's great to just come back to those entry points with work after work. It's relevant in anything that you're looking at to see it through those lenses. So really appreciate you bringing that forward tonight. So what we're going to do is I'm going to bring this back up, our Mentimeter. So some of those words, maybe through Work News, maybe through the sketchbook, maybe through Big Raven, either resonate or like are in conflict with what you might think now. So what we're going to do is we'll go to the next slide. And sorry, I'm just going to move my So the next slide is, how has your understanding of Emily Carr shifted so far? So if you're on Menti, if you go back to Menti and you go forward a slide, so you can put in there, how has your understanding of Emily Carr shifted so far? Share a thought, a question, or an aha moment. Kiriko or Susan or Sarah said something, I was like, ah, right, that makes me think about it a little bit differently. So we'll take a couple minutes just to stretch. So take some time to think about that question, put it into Menti. Also feel free to get up and stretch and walk around your room a little bit, maybe get a drink of water, and we'll come back in about 4 minutes or so, 4 or 5 minutes. Let's come back at 7:50 West Coast time, and we'll go on to our last 3 presenters. So yeah, so we'll take a moment, but I'll stay here and I'll read some of what we have so far.
These are great. I feel badly about her being called a songbird murderer. I think she was actually trying to be compassionate. It was actually kind of like she knew they were done for because she'd made a mistake, you know, but it is a dark story. There's no question.
Yeah, well, I have to embrace the darkness too. So more nuanced. She's a far more complex, vulnerable person than I had previously thought. Complicated, her emotions and her subject matter choices, more complex, yeah. So feel free to add some more things, even if you've done one and you want to add some more. I had no idea that she had a dark past in the sanatorium. I hadn't seen her pencil sketches before either. I'm thinking also just the idea of layering with all 3 of your presentations so far, Kiriko, that layering both Emily Carr adding in the people, and then also Sunny Asu adding in his layers to it. Sarah, the layering of the expressiveness of the face to really, on the sketches, to really tell about how she was feeling and how she was thinking. And then layering in the entry points with Susan. So a woman of her time and space who created timeless art. I respect her even more. More colorful, progressive, she's outside of the norm, and how gifted she was and how she also suffered because of this. I was unaware of Carr's journey with mental health issues. Why is it that talent and genius often go hand in hand? I find myself struck thinking about Maria Tippett's theory that Emily had been sexually abused by her father and wondering whether this pushed her to an quote unquote unconventional life as an artist rather than wholly choosing it. She was so focused on what she was doing that she wanted and on doing, oh, I lost that. So yeah, really complex cultural norm toward the them, quote unquote them, an open door to expanding knowledge about Indigenous culture. And especially in terms of, Sarah, you're mentioning the anti-Semitism as well. So in terms of Jewish culture and seeing the real harm in representation like that. So,
Complicated.
yeah, totally complicated. So 1 more minute, we'll just taking one last sip. And we'll come back to this page as well after the end, after the final 3, and you can add to these even more. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing. Thank you everyone for joining in on that, that exercise. And that's really what this is all about, is how has our understanding deepened? And whether that deepening is like a more complex and nuanced, hopefully a more complex and nuanced look at a figure rather than a, a more sort of like two-dimensional look at a figure. I think the complexity is what it's all about, and deepening into understanding is what it's all about. So welcome back, everyone. And thanks again for joining, whether you're joining on Zoom or Facebook Live. We're going to go into the second half of our event. Michelle, do you want me to share the images right away, or do you want to speak without the image first?
Why don't I start?
Okay, so I'll introduce you though first.
Okay, yeah.
So Michelle Jacques is the chief curator at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. Michelle has curated exhibitions of the work of contemporary artists, including Carol Sawyer, Rodney Sayers, Gwen McGregor, and Hiraki Sawa, and has co-curated retrospective exhibitions of the work of the Canadian artists Anna Banana and Jacques MacDonald. In the 2019 Unformable Things, she examined the work of Emily Carr alongside her Canadian contemporaries. So thanks so much for being here, Michelle, and you're up.
Thank you. I find it so remarkable that with very little planning, we've come up with an evening that just offers so many perspectives on Emily Carr. And even though my relationship with her and her work is very complicated, I do find it fascinating how I just can't seem to let her go, and how there's just so much to contend with, and that's endlessly interesting to me. When I was a graduate student, my thesis research focused on a Montreal artist named Prudence Heward, who was quite a bit younger than Carr, but you know, because of the way Carr's career sort of got stretched out, Prudence Heward and Emily Carr ended up working at the same time. Sort of the height of their careers were the 20s and 30s. So in a way they were contemporaries, in a way they both sort of floated around the group of seven. And Prudence Heward is known for her portraits of women, and my graduate work looked particularly at a small group of portraits in her practice that were pictures of Black women. And Prudence Heward was not Black. Most of her sitters were not Black, but there was this very strange little selection of works that she made in Montreal in the 1930s into the early 40s of these unnamed Black women. And in doing my graduate work and trying to figure out why this well-to-do Anglophone woman in Montreal painted these figures without going into a lot of detail about an artist that I'm not supposed to be talking about tonight. You know, I came to the conclusion that there was just something very unsettling about the right to access the bodies of these women that Prudence Heward felt. And so, you know, looking around at other artists working at that time, like Emily Carr, painting Indigenous subjects, carvings, villages, a portrait or two, I always had that uneasy feeling that she was sort of reaching in and taking something that didn't belong to her. So imagine my surprise sort of carrying around this sort of, I'll say, late colonial rather than post-colonial opinion about Carr and her work, imagine my surprise to end up working at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, where I'm responsible for taking care of and sharing the gallery's collection of Emily Carr paintings. So maybe we can look at my slide now. The painting that I have chosen is called Odds and Ends, and it was painted in 1939. It's a largish work. It's oil on canvas, which I guess means it comes from one of, or a relatively lush time in Carr's career, because a lot of the time she was not painting on canvas, she was painting on whatever she could find. This painting has a wonderful history in that it was in the collection of the Greater Victoria Public Library. And at a point in the late 90s, it looked like they were going to have to sell it to raise funds for their activities. And an anonymous donor, to this day unnamed, stepped in and created an endowment fund at the Victoria Foundation for the library. And then the library sold the painting to the art gallery for $1, rather than putting it up to the open market and potentially ending up in a situation where the painting would be lost to Victoria. So we're forever grateful to that donor. And another interesting thing about this work in the context of this conversation is that it will be on its way to the McMichael next year for a show that Sarah is curating called Uninvited. But I'm, well, actually, before I get back, I get to the point of why I like this work so much, I'm going to talk a little bit about another aspect that I find slightly sticky in Carr's work. You know, we know that she painted totem poles and First Nations carvings and First Nations villages. And to this day, those are the works that sort of garner the most attention and create the most fervor when her work comes up to market. But from a critical perspective, it's actually her later work of trees and forests that are considered her mature work. And the shift towards this new subject matter came after Carr became involved or connected to the Group of Seven, and particularly became very close friends with Lorne Harris. And in 1929, Harris wrote to Carr with the following advice. He said, "Don't give up anything, just push it all further and more searchingly. The reason I mention the totem is that it already in itself is a definite artistic form. And if you did too many, you might become dependent on them." So Harris said things like this to Carr, and is kind of credited with pushing her away from the totem poles and First Nation subjects towards painting, you know, where she found spiritual solace, which was in the forest. So that mature work comes after this exchange with Lorne Harris. But the reason I say that I still find this later work, a little sticky, is that Harris, as a member of the Group of Seven, the sort of critique of their work is that their tactics, their artistic tactics actually included erasure of the Indigenous inhabitants of the spaces that they painted, so that the Group of Seven painting these empty, untouched landscapes were actually sort of part of the colonial endeavor to depict Canada as a nation that was there for or a land that was there for the taking, so that the nation of Canada could be established. So then I find myself, I felt uncomfortable about Emily Carr painting Indigenous subjects, but then is it any better if she's painting empty landscapes as part of the colonial project? So a couple years ago, I did a show at the gallery, which was called Picturing the Giants, the Changing Landscapes of Emily Carr. And this was where I found my comfort with Carr. This work, Odds and Ends, one of my favorite things to do with Carr's work is to take her diaristic writings like Odds and Ends and just compare the timelines, what she was writing about, to the dates on the works that I'm working with. So in the late spring of 1939, Carr had traveled out to stay on a farm, which she called Rat Hall, and which was located near Millstream Road in Langford. So by today's standards, not very far from Victoria, but in her day, this would have been sort of out in the wilderness, except that when she was staying at Rat Hall, when she looked in one direction, it was pure forest. When she looked out the back of the house, they had started to take down the trees to build the Island Highway. So I'm not entirely sure if that's what we're looking at in Odds and Ends, but certainly at this point in her career, she had become very concerned with what she was seeing happen to her beloved BC landscape. So I'm going to read you a quote, which actually predates this painting by 5 years, but it gives you some sense of Carr's perspective on ecology and environmentalism. This quote is from the chapter called Noah's Ark, 1934, in Hundreds and Thousands. And Carr's describing her impressions of the felling of a tree. And she writes, "There's a torn and splintered ridge across the stumps I call the screamers. These are the unsawn last bits, the cry of the tree's heart, wrenching and tearing apart just before she gives that sway, and the dreadful groan of falling, that dreadful pause, while her executioners step back with their saws and axes resting and watch. It's a horrible sight to see a tree felled, even now, though the stumps are gray and rotting. As you pass among them, you see their screamers sticking up out of their own tombstones, as it were. They are their own tombstones and their own mourners." So the incursion of so-called progress on the natural landscape that Carr loved so much is a recurring thread in her work. Depictions of screamers appear again and again alongside the First Nations subjects and the untouched trees and forests for which she is better known. There has even been, this was really an interesting discovery, there's even been an indication that Carr may have been a really early adopter, if not one of the very first people to use the terms old growth and second growth, indicating how deeply she was thinking about the land and resource extraction. So the reason I am so drawn to Odds and Ends is that I believe it carries an environmentalist message that feels like the right place for me to situate my admiration for Emily Carr. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Michelle. Yeah, there's so much tension both within the work and within the life, right? So I thought you captured that beautifully, so thank you. So we're going to go on to Kate Kerr. Kate Kerr is the site manager for Carr House. So earlier when I was pointing, earlier when I was pointing in that direction, I was pointing in the direction of where Kate is right now. So Carr House is the childhood home of Emily Carr and a National Historic Site. In addition to this, Kate also is an exhibits fabricator and touring exhibits coordinator at the Royal BC Museum, as well as runs in situ services which collaborates with museums to create artifact mounts and other exhibit components. So thank you so much for being here, Kate.
Thanks, Chris.
And you look like you're in the parlor, are you?
Yeah, so right now I am in Carr House, which is on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. This is actually the bedroom that I'm in, where Emily Carr was born. I thought it would be appropriate to be here. It was either this or the dining room where she started to teach. So, so I will say right off the bat that I am one of I'm kind of an odd one in this group because I am not an Emily Carr scholar. I of course know of her and I have had her in my life throughout my life, but I'm a relative newcomer to being immersed in her life. I started at Carr House on April 1st of this year. So my background, as Chris said, is museums, but it's also community. So one of the things I'm doing with Emily Carr House is to bring it more to the community and celebrate Emily in a different way, sort of making the house more of a place of celebration through the themes of her life. So one thing that these months here have afforded me is the time to sort of, a little bit of time, to start to ponder what those themes might be and how that can be brought to a celebration of her and help the community embrace this house in a different way and address its sort of colonial legacy. So I've been looking through the objects that are in the house, there are not many objects left in the house. It wasn't in the Carr family's possession for quite a few decades. And so the objects that have come back to the house once it became a national and provincial historic site are few and far between. But some of the things that are here are a few of her books. And I feel that, of course, reading and writing was very important throughout her life. So the books that she kept and passed down to other people have kind of given me a few little hints into her, other than, her own actual writing. And I've been sort of looking through one of my favorite books that is in the collection. It's a book that her father gave to her when she was 11 years old. And I'm going to show it to you if I could. So I don't have art to show, but I have books. So this is the book. This would be backwards probably, right? It's called, Boy's Own Natural History. And inside, it is inscribed to Emily from her father. If I can get that page. Oh, actually, she wrote, Emily Carr from father on her birthday, 1882. Can you see that? I don't know if you can see this there. So I've been looking through this as again, sort of trying to figure out, because of course nature has played such a huge role in her life. And, looking in reading, she's talking about, I'm always asking the question, what is it that you are struggling for? What is that vital thing that the woods contain, possess, that you want? Why do you go back to the woods unsatisfied, longing to express something that is there and not able to find it? So, I'm thinking, okay, book of natural history, that's maybe where she's started off with her thinking about natural history. It is an outdated book, but and it has some challenging things to read. But one of the little passages was about how the influence of climate and vegetation on the character of man is one of the passages. And it goes on to talk about the indigenous people of North America and how basically that they can read the trees and the sun and the moss and the color and the light of their surroundings, unlike a European person can. Which again, you know, outdated sort of writing, but an interesting thought that Emily obviously grew up with in this beloved book from her father. I also was wanting to see which animals might have shown up. And of course, there is a picture of the raven, which became much beloved to her. I don't know if that was an influence, but these are all just little things in my journey that I'm trying to explore. Where did her influences come from? What did she, where were her thoughts formed? And so I think one of the things that we're discovering this evening is just how she was constantly trying new things. And that's the sort of thing that I think can reflect in a community center that I'm sort of bringing to this house. So the element of her always exploring and always learning is something I feel that can be definitely translated to something that this house can represent in and celebrate her through. So one of the other books I wanted to show you was the Roget's Thesaurus of English Words and Phrases. I'm sure she used this. And you probably all do this when you have an old book that somebody has loved much, and you sort of shake it and see which pages it opens up to. And so I did that with her, with this book, to see what might open up to. One it opened up to is a page that talks about oneness, individuality, singleness, solitariness, solitude, isolation, abstraction. So I thought that was interesting, that opened up to that immediately. And another page that it opened up to was small, which I thought was sweet. The definition of small: little, small, minute, diminutive, inconsiderable. On that same page, it's hugeness, vastness, enormousness, enormity, immensity, monstrousness and monstrosity, and infinity. So I think, you know, just these words, that these pages, I would love to think that I'm doing this little exercise and it's actually the pages that she has explored. It's more my own journey of trying to figure out what aspects of Emily Carr are important to me and hoping that those are important to other people. But the biggest thing that keeps coming to me again and again as I'm in this house exploring through her thoughts are just that she was always exploring and always changing. And again, another page that it opened to was indeed change. So just, and also on the same page, continuance, to continue, persist, go on, keep on, abide, keep, pursue, hold on, run on, follow on, carry on. I just feel like these little pages in these books, and as I'm going through it, learning more about her, there's giving me little hints as to what aspects of Emily I can celebrate, because she is a controversial figure, and I don't want to celebrate everything about her just willy-nilly. I want to think about how that reflects our current thinking, and but also recognize where she came from. So that's all I wanted just to say, is that I am very much on the beginning of a journey. I really appreciate what everyone else has said in this evening so far, because I feel like I have a lot to learn still. But that's the wonderful thing about Emily, is that with her works and with her writing and with her wide depth of personality, there's so much to use as a jumping off point for exploration.
Thank you so much, Kate. I was muted, but now I'm not. That idea of journey is what this evening is about. It's a car ride. So we started with war canoes. We traveled to a sketchbook and songbirds. We went on to Big Raven. We traveled to odds and ends and the tension of deforestation, environmental degradation. we traveled to thinking about when she was a young girl reading these books and the pages opening up both in the book of natural history for boys and the thesaurus, and trying to read into books. And then we end with India Young, and also the journey of an exhibition. So Fresh Seeing started at the Audain Art Museum, and it is now currently at the Royal BC Museum. So that's why I wanted to start with you, Kiriko, and why I wanted to end with you, India. Though India wasn't the co-curator, it was Catherine Bridge for this exhibition, but India is here at the Royal BC Museum. I'll read your bio. So India Young joined the Royal BC Museum, which I'm very thankful for as an amazing colleague, in 2019 as the curator of art and images. She looks forward to expanding the collection towards artists working in the province after 1950 and artists previously excluded from institutional collections. India's research and exhibitions trace Canadian and American art histories through feminist, decolonial, and critical race frameworks. So thank you so much, India, for being here. And you're up.
Hi, Chris and everyone. Thank you for your wonderful conversation about Carr. Let's see if I can figure out how to share my screen.
You did it once already, so.
Fingers crossed. Never. What are you guys looking at? Are you looking at my notes?
You should swap displays. These swap displays.
Okay. There we go.
Yep, all good.
I love this one.
Okay. It seems like Sarah and I were on a wavelength.
Oh yeah.
This
is fascinating.
It's fascinating. So with the opportunity of hosting Fresh Seeing at the museum this fall came the opportunity to curate a very small exhibition based in our collections, which is Everyday Emily Carr. And when one is on a very short timeline, trying to come up with a way to think about Carr that might be a little bit refreshing, I sort of landed on her portraiture because it's not exhibited very often. We don't often think of her as being a portrait artist. And this led to the conundrum of, oh, now I realize that I swapped screens and my notes are on the wrong side. So sorry if I'm looking this way. There aren't that many self-portraits of Carr. I very much appreciated what Sarah said about her writing, both her published writing and her letters to friends and colleagues, is very mannered and very performative of this artist that she wants to be. And yet she has erased herself from the representations, the visual representations she creates of the world, which I was very drawn to. And so this little, if we can call it a portrait of Carr, is in the exhibit. So if you live in Victoria, you can come see it in person. And that sort of led me down a little rabbit hole because like Susan, I am not from British Columbia or Canada at all. And I didn't know who Carr was when I moved here. And then suddenly she fell into my life in a big way. She has been mythologized as this huge Canadian icon, and I am mystified as to how she has escaped the sort of general identity and gender politics of being a woman who has achieved this national recognition. I mean, in the exhibit, she's compared to Frances Hodgkins from New Zealand. She's continually compared to George O'Keeffe. If we compared her to the Beaver Hall group, her identity, her gender are, or these women's gender and identity is continually sort of foisted into the conversation. And I just wonder how she managed to escape that. And is it important that she's escaped that, or that Canadian authors and art historians don't feel compelled to sort of go down that rabbit hole. I don't know. I'm puzzling through it, and this is the work that is leading me there. So this work is from the same period, slightly earlier. Carr arrives as a 28-year-old in London, and then she is training in a very academic style, a very British kind of painting. When her beau from Victoria comes over and proposes marriage, he's sort of looking to, you know, capture her hand, and he goes away empty-handed. And then she jaunts off to the countryside, to the Cornish countryside, to really delve into pursue her career and her commitment to being an artist. And it's a moment in her life where she makes a choice, and she starts cultivating this very artistic identity that where she starts to inhabit qualities that could be defined as masculine and often are, and then she also proceeds this moment into a place where she actually has to be put into a sanatorium. And I think someone in the comments talked about Tippett, and I think it was Tippett who notes that she's actually confined for hysteria, this very particularly womany thing in this moment. And is it because she is, well, who knows? These are questions. So this is her at St. Ives, and here she is in this moment, painting portrait and really forming this foundational skill of portraiture. Painting was very gendered in the European construct in this moment, and still life painting, flower painting, and portraiture are very much sort of the domain of women and amateurs, and it's landscape painting and history painting and painting in oil on canvas and in plein air painting that is the dominion of men. And so she at this time is encouraged by the instructors of the school to do plein air painting and to specifically paint the beach. And she starts cultivating her her otherness. I was very struck by the idea that over the course of the conversation, we keep calling her an unconventional woman, but can you be unconventional and also a woman of your time is a question that I ask. On the one hand, she is unconventional in her pursuit of an artistic career and her achievements as an artist. And on the other hand, she's very much a woman of her time in her engagement with British Columbian Indigenous communities and other sort of concepts that are being organized by people like anthropologists who are her friends and colleagues, Charles Newcomb, and other white folks at the time. Big questions. So this painting that we are looking at is part of a series of 10 works that are, again, are they portraits of herself? They're portraits of her, of the back of her, sort of slowly expanding and also moving into the forest. And at this time in Cornwall, the practice of plein air painting is to sit on the beach and to paint the beach and the sky. And in sort of that very British Turner interest, it's all about capturing the light out in the open spaces. And of course, Emily Carr insists on just wandering back into the forest. I don't know if we can call her a forest flaneur, but she seems to be sort of capturing it in this moment. And in the whole series, she just proceeds farther and farther into obscurity and the obscurity of this place that is a forest. And the poem is sort of a composite poem, so it builds on itself as she moves farther and farther away from her artist peers into this unknown space. So to come back to this work, it's worth asking, is this a portrait of Carr? This is certainly Carr's interpretation of herself and is participant in the mannering, the construct that Carr wants to create. When Carr comes back from the UK, from England, she's adopted all of these new physical mannerisms that she didn't have before she went. Now she's pushed the 30 mark. She's really into the matronly era or age of being a quote woman. And she has started riding horses astride and smoking and swearing. And when she writes about these activities, you can see that she gets like a joy and a pleasure out of shocking her sisters and Victorian audiences. And over the course of the next many years of her life, she does things that are overtly claiming this quote masculine territory of painting in oil on canvas, of painting these landscape, British Columbian landscapes. And then she also does these like very specifically gendered feminine things, like her hooked rugs, which are another big part of our collection. And rug hooking is this like deeply feminine art practice that sort of all Victorian women, and I mean from Victoria, but also of a generation, are doing at this time, that I can't help. So this is the larger poem. If you look at this number, you can find it on the BC Archives website. It's kind of a long poem, so I'm not going to read it. But this is the moment where all of her peers, who are also students, sort of watch her march into oblivion. And she really does, she's very interested in standing alone, like a tall tree. And I think that's what I have to say about that. Oh, the other thing that I was going to say was that she, in 1936, in this moment, it's 10 years after she's been hanging out with a group of 7, she's received a fair bit of national acclaim. She's been dubbed a quote genius by art critics at the Canadian exhibition at the Tate in the UK. And this is the moment when she burns the majority of her work from this moment in England, and she erases this period of painting portraiture and flowers and still lifes, sort of vacate that part of her life or that identity from what can be known about her in future moments. I think that's where I'll end it.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much, India. So, wow. So that's, what a journey. I feel like we really traveled a lot of ground. And I was just thinking as you were finishing, India, that like I often think of like museums are, what I love about museums is an opportunity to gather good people together. And hear perspectives and learn and deepen and challenge thinking. So thank you all for taking part in this and bringing forward the courage to bring forward perspectives. That's not easy. And I really, though you said at one point, you were talking about the poem, India, building on itself. And I felt like tonight you were all building on each other's perspectives in not intentional, but maybe intentional ways. So thank you so much. I want to just come back to this, the scrolling. Can you see? Sorry, wait, let me try this again. I'm going to take away the PowerPoint. I want to come back to this. So again, just in the last couple of minutes, how has your understanding of Emily Carr shifted so far? So these are some thoughts after the first three presenters, and I encourage you to enter in some new thoughts after Michelle and Kate and India brought us, like, it felt like deeper in. And we'll just sort of, we'll continue to add to this. And
I wanted to actually make a quick comment on Susan's presentation. If
yeah, please.
All right, Chris, just to like let comments filter. But when Susan was talking about the fact that the museum did not acquire Carr's paintings in 1913, I think there's an important history there. So at the time, the Provincial Museum was a, quote, natural history museum. And for complicated reasons around erasures of Indigenous people, Indigenous material culture and visual culture ended up in natural history museums and not in art museums. And so the person who rejected accepting Emily Carr's paintings, he was a friend of hers. His name was Charles Newcomb. He worked as the museum's ethnographer, but he was not a trained ethnographer. And so he is primarily responsible for the collection of Indigenous belongings that is happening. So as an anthropologist, he's recording the, quote, erasure of Indigenous people or the dying of Indigenous people while he is removing, literally, their belongings from their homes to put in his museum. And he is also a broker of Indigenous belongings. And so he collects them and then sends them to museums out east. And so his relationship to Carr and to Indigenous people in this province is another very particularly RBCM history.
I thought, India, that the discussion that went on between Newcomb and Carr and his rejection of this work was really based on the fact that because she'd incorporated these Fauvist influences that Kiriko was telling us about, it was
I was about to jump in too.
Yeah, not sufficiently documentary to actually be accessible into the museum as our anthropological documentation of those sites. So in fact, her Fauvist training had in a way disqualified her as being a recorder of a dependable witness to those cultures in their view. Just really interesting.
Yeah.
He was very bitter about it.
He actually told her, or one of his reasons was that had she toned down her colors and not use her bright imagination that she depicted unrealistically, using her new way of creativity, these paintings might be worth collecting.
Yeah, but I mean, it's harsh on poor old Newcomb in historical hindsight because he was collecting to a rubric of veracity and clinical, impartiality, like just the facts, ma'am. And that's not who Emily Carr was. So you can see where he was torn.
And he was also constructing that reality.
Right.
There, of course, is no authentic or real Indigenous material culture, I was just doing some reading about Carr visiting villages and watching the women and their calico skirts swish. And, calico is obviously material that can be both Indigenous and not Indigenous, but Charles Newcomb would not be collecting it.
Yeah.
I want to be mindful of the time. It's a little after 8:30 on the West Coast, 11:30 on the East
Oh.
Coast. Thank you, Sarah, and others. I don't know if Susan, your friends and family are still with us. But and I was thinking, Michelle, when you started to talk about the other artists, and you're like, oh, I'm not supposed to talk about that other artist. And I'm like, oh, I want to know more. That it just made me reflect on how I'd love to do this again and find another artist who finds connection across these institutions. So in even also thinking, India, your desire for a different kind of collecting. So maybe even it's a emerging like project rather than like existing work within a collection. So there's lots to still explore, but I really appreciate Kiriko, Sarah, Susan, Michelle, Kate, India, all of you taking part in this and finding these connection points with Emily Carr and her legacy and your own journey and your own process of thinking about the complexity and sometimes challenging nature of the work and the life. So thank you so much. This will be our official end of the evening.
Thank you,
And,
Chris.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Yeah, it was so nice to have everyone here
Very
on
much.
Zoom and on Facebook Live. We'll do our official end right now. I'm gonna say goodbye does anyone want to say any last final words
Thanks.
before Sarah
Thank you
goes
for
to bed?
organizing this.
Thank you for organizing it.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Chris.
So much.
Thank you.
All right, well, thanks everyone. So that's
Cheerio.